This is Danielle with the Motivity Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Hirschman. So thankful for you guys to listen to the show. Everything we are talking about is technology. We're breaking down technology. Today, we're actually going to go into about Gen Z and what they expect from companies as they go into the marketplace, and how important technology is to them, not only from management and communication, but devices. And what does that mean when you're hiring and looking for this talent pool coming into the marketplace? Today, we have Mark Beal on, and he's a professor at Rutgers. So first of all, Mark, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, Danielle, thanks for having me. Timing is perfect because just a few days ago, I was presenting at a national conference to executive recruiters, and it was all about how do you recruit and retain Generation Z. So what we're going to talk about today are some things I shared just a few days ago.
Oh, that is so interesting. And it's such a hot topic, right? You want the best talent. You want to, get them in the seats. You want to retain them. But how do you do that? And I think there's, a bit of formulation here that we can definitely talk about. Obviously, Mark and I are not Gen Zs. Maybe, we sound like we are, but we're not, right? And so giving people our view as well, right? And giving that insight is very important. Me working at Cisco, we live, eat, and breathe technology, platforms, devices, communication tools. And I have to say, I talk about this often, but I can't go work for another company that doesn't have the same platforms that I'm used to. And it is part of, if I went to interview for a company, that would be one of the top questions, I have to say, on my list, even from, a PC Mac standpoint. So we could dig into that a little bit. But before we get too far into that conversation, Mark, tell us just a little bit about your background. How did you end up becoming a professor, which is amazing? Rutgers is such a great university. But just tell us a little bit, about your background. I know you have books out, so, come on, plug your life away.
No, I appreciate that, Danielle. I mean, I spent the past 30 years in public relations and marketing on the agency side. So working with big brands, big companies, Coca-Cola, Nike, Capital One, Taco Bell. And for many of those years, the focus was how do you engage millennials, right? For, throughout the 2000s, 2005, 2010. And as you said, I was fortunate enough that Rutgers University, where I graduated from many years ago, asked if I could come teach a public relations course, which turned into 2, which turned into 3, which turned into becoming a full-time professor of practice, which is what I am now. But around 2017, I'd left a class and I just had one of those light bulb moments. I say, millennials have been the focus. Gen Z, when we get to 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 and beyond, will become the focus. So I really want to immerse myself in Gen Z. What makes them tick? What's important to them? To your point, how can marketers engage with them effectively? How can employers recruit and retain them? So I kind of started the journey in 2017. So now it's 5 years. And I start my day the same way every day at about 5:36 in the morning. Is I just simply Google studies, surveys, articles, stories, interviews, what are brands doing? And now in 2022, I share a lot of that actually with my students. So when I go into my 400 level marketing classes, we start with 15 minutes, what we call real-time marketing. Who's doing what right now? Not just around Gen Z, but a lot of it is Gen Z. And that's just led to, you said, 3 books, 2018, Decoding Gen Z, 2020, Engaging Gen Z, and 2022, which just came out, Gen Z Graduates To Adulthood. This year's a milestone year because the oldest Gen Zers turned 25. So they are now 2, 3, 4 years into their careers.
It's interesting. You think a little bit about these people going to the workplace and what do they expect? Like, what would you say? Like, if you just had to summarize what a Gen Z expects from the workforce, what are they doing? Can you kind of sum it up a little bit in a nutshell?
Do we have an hour? No.
Right. And and obviously the focus is more, and our focus a little bit is more on the technology side. But, if I guess, this podcast is all about insight. So I feel like you could give insight, on many levels. But yeah.
Absolutely. Again, coming just off of this, keynote speech to executive recruiters from all across the country who are attempting to find candidates for those jobs at kinds of companies, tech companies, real estate companies, insurance companies, marketing agencies, et cetera. So I'll just rattle off real quickly kind of 5 or 6 key elements. Then I know we're going to delve more into technology and others. So yes, technology is one for sure. I can't take credit for this quote, but it's one of my favorite. Gen Z was the first generation that learned to swipe before they could wipe. That comes from the CMO of MTV. They've had technology in their hands since the age of 1, 2, and 3. They are digital natives. They are tech savvy. They're looking for that in employers. We'll come back to that because I know we're going to talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
They are the purpose generation. They are looking for and to work for companies that have a higher purpose than just making money, right? So I want to go work somewhere where I feel good about the work I'm doing. Yes, I understand we're trying to generate revenue and profits and all that. And I can give you an example or two of that of students who've come back to guest lecture my speech, my class, and talk about that. So the purpose generation. 3, they're the most diverse and inclusive generation ever. They want to go work at companies that have a corporate culture of diversity, inclusion, and the B word, what I call the B word, belonging. I just don't want to be a cog in the machine. I want to belong here. I want to feel like I belong. I want to have an experience of diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, diverse thought, all those kinds of things. That's another one. Another key one, which ties into technology, so we'll call this our 4th kind of pillar, is ability to work remotely. Maybe full-time, maybe not, maybe hybrid, right? It's a combination, but it's the idea that if the company I work for has the latest, greatest technology, which you alluded to in the introduction, why can't I a day or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or maybe 5 work remotely? But the only way we're going to be able to do that is with the right technology, right? So that's another area. And then I'll give I think that was about 4, maybe 5. We'll give one last one for now. Mental health. Mental health is becoming less of a taboo topic in society, and I give credit to folks like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps and others. But for Generation Z, believe it or not, it is the top priority, their mental health, their mental wellness. And so as members of the class of 22 graduated in May, just a few months ago, and by the way, aside from teaching on the side, I just try to help students secure internships, secure jobs as my way of just giving back.
And as a keynote to that, that's how Mark and I met. So,
that's right.
So a little bit of side note that I do have an intern, and she makes, she digitalized my life, and I couldn't give her enough credit, and she introduced Mark to myself, and I'm grateful for interns. I can't express that enough for people listening. I have a full-time job. I run a podcast, and I can't make my world go around without an intern. And it's great. It's a dual learning experience. Trust me. It's your point. It's a win-win for everybody. It is a win-win.
In your case, I'll call the employer. There's value that those interns bring, and of course, full-time entry level. But for the student, the experience to collaborate with someone like you, the experience that can then go on the resume, the experience that then helps them secure the next internship. So again, my purpose now in life, aside from teaching, is to give back to this next generation and help them secure a real experience by kind of leveraging all my connections. But anyway.
Wait, can we stop for quickly?
Yeah.
It's funny. I just want to bring this up because someone was just asking me about this. They said, well, how did you find your intern? And I said, I use a platform called Handshake. And it was one of the coolest, easiest, helpful websites, apps, whatever, platform. I have to say, Mark, do you push that at Rutgers? And the reason I'm asking is because I think that people would love to be like, well, how do I get an internship? Or as an employer, how do I sign up to get an intern? What does that look like? That connection?
Great question. And it ties into technology, right? So a great question. So yes, at Rutgers University, and again, I'm not a full-time career advisor. I do it as a way to give back. So that's not my full-time job. But yes, they do use Handshake. And to your point, it's very efficient. If a company and organization is looking for interns, whether from Rutgers or maybe other universities, they simply can be in contact with, say, the career advisors. The career advisors then take the opportunity, they put it on Handshake. Now, all of a sudden, you have many students who have access to that. Then, as you said, many students who can apply. Then on the other side, the employer side, they can, so it is an efficient system. So I'd say that's one for sure. 2, LinkedIn. Hopefully you agree. LinkedIn over the last, I would say,
LinkedIn.
I love LinkedIn. I think over the last 10 years, it's really evolved into much more of thought leadership platform, content sharing platform, content creation platform, networking platform, connections,
send a message.
Yeah. Years ago, and I can say this, I'm the old Gen Xer. Years ago, LinkedIn was, you and I went to a conference, we saw each other, we met, hey, great to meet, we got back, we want to connect, and we never really talked again. We never spoke again. And it was more like, I don't want to call it matchmaking, but today it is so much more, as we just talked about. And Gen Zers, especially Gen Zers who are sophomores, juniors, seniors in college, and those who start a career, LinkedIn is in that solar system of what I call their media channel preferences. It definitely is.
It's interesting to know.
So May 2022 graduates, again, trying to help them prep, help them with their resumes, help them prepare for job interviews, calling contacts and saying, are you looking for entry level? If so, I've got some. So as they call me back in April, May, and June, hey, I got the job, great news. And of course, my first reaction is kind of like, hey, what are they paying you? I'm just curious. But before I could even say that, they said, hey, guess what? They're giving me mental health day as a benefit, mental health days as a benefit, whether once a quarter or maybe once a month. So that's something, we used, PTO has been talked about for several years, maybe years ago, sick days, but this thing called mental health days. And when I spoke at the conference the other day, it turned into a 30-minute discussion, just this one topic. It's resonating with Gen Z. They feel like the employer really cares about their well-being, their work-life balance, their mental health. Just not too long ago on World Mental Health Day, I heard from many, many companies and agencies, and big and small, who shut down for the day. I've never heard that before this year. Never heard that before this year. And again, it goes back to the idea of the employer understands, again.
Definitely.
Yeah, work-life balance, mental health. So that's another key element.
So something interesting, and this is not another strategy that I think is out there. So they what they did is for mental health is they don't have any internal meetings on certain days. So they actually tell us that we can't talk to each other. We want you either just doing what you need to do or talk to other individuals, because I think what happens at companies is we meet so much internally that we forget that there's external customers and people that we need to communicate with. Another strategy, and obviously I work at Cisco and I'm very fond of the company and a lot of their strategies, but they give us Cisco days, and they just give us the day off. So a great day, and I know we're parents and we have children, and maybe this is not so similar for Gen Z yet and not having kids, but the day after Halloween, right? It's like an exhausting day. Or the day after Super Bowl. These days, and whether it's, I feel like that is mental health, because you're still running around or whatever is on your plate for that day. So we do get these Cisco days, which is another cool strategy. Like, they're days that they know that probably the workforce is exhausted and we're not always focused on probably what we should be doing. Another great example, I think, of how you can use that time effectively to attract,
Completely agree with you. And what's your point? Whether you call them recharge days, refresh days, mental health, it's the idea that this employer understands we've got a lot going on. Yes, I work here, but I do have a life as well, balancing all these things. And from every individual I've heard from, whether a company like yours, other companies, when I've heard about this, they just speak so, what the right word is, I don't know if it's proudly. They're coming, hey, my company recognizes this, and we're shutting down, as you said, on a random Tuesday in July. So that resonates with Generation Z.
So, Mark, you talked about their purpose, right? They want to feel like they're coming into these companies and that company has a purpose. But how does a Gen Z individual bring that up in like an interview process? Like, I think, I feel like when you're going through, it's like, well, where do you then ask these questions, right? How are you asking? Can you define your diversity and inclusion strategy? I think it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. Yes, right? You're so focused on, so how does that work into the fold? Like, maybe give advice there. I love that they're bringing it up and I think it's important and they care about it. But then how does that work into?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you raise a good point just about interviewing. Interviewing, as you know, as well as anyone, has changed so much with technology over the past few years, especially since the arrival of the pandemic right now. Many interviews never take place in person anymore, right? They're on a, platform like Zoom or Teams or something else.
Or Cisco WebEx.
Cisco, that's right. Or Cisco WebEx, absolutely. So that's interesting, right? So when I prep students for interviews, or even the first round is just a phone call. And what I'll say to them is they can only judge you on one thing: the articulation, the confidence, the enthusiasm of your voice. They can't see what you're wearing. They can't see if you're slouching. They can't see if you're tall, short. It doesn't matter. But how does your voice come across, right? But then when we get to the Zoom call, we get to the WebEx call, like right now, again, they're seeing, I guess, from the waist up, so to speak, or something. But there's
doesn't that make it fun that you can have like sweatpants on and no one really knows what's going on in your home office, but it gives it it's funny, it gives a different element, but then when you see someone in person that you've only met on video, you're like, oh, and we do a pretty good job, I have to say. I mean, but you still are only seeing half their body.
Yeah.
But we do work in, and I think you mentioned it, in this hybrid work now, right? We work in a hybrid mode. And I think you're giving such a different perspective, because what I'm doing in my job is making sure that everyone can connect and that everyone has a great experience over video. But if you're not showing up and those conversations aren't good, or you're not asking the right questions,
correct,
then those meetings fall flat.
Absolutely. So again, when I'm helping Gen Zers prep for these interviews, we cover off on two areas. One is just the physical theater on the WebEx call, right? And so I always, and I half kidding when I say this, but don't conduct the call where you've got roommates running behind you, and yelling and screaming. Yeah. You got to completely distract the person who's interviewing you, and they're not even going to be looking at you. They're going to be like, why is that person running back? So things like that.
Good lighting.
The lighting. Make sure there's not some sort of piece of artwork back there that just, the interviewer is just staring at that and they're not even paying attention. So that's that. But to your point, the second one is, and the interview process has changed so much as far as, are there multiple rounds? Am I interviewing with three or four people at one time? All those things. But I always tell them there's certain times when you want to bring up those, I don't want to call them sensitive questions, but certain questions, right? That first session, most likely a phone or maybe on WebEx like this, is probably with a recruiter. So it's probably someone who's more in HR recruiting. They're not necessarily close to the specific position yet, but they just are evaluating based on, could this person be a fit? Could they be a cultural fit here? Does it make sense? And then if so, then they're going to get probably next round with the actual team or the group that they may be working with. And so I always say, prepare smart questions. And you've got to figure out when the right time is for those smart questions. So a question to me about things like culture and purpose, probably doesn't come up maybe in the first call, but it should if we're going through this and we're now into call 2 or 3. Yeah, you're going to want to, as I say, interview them as much as they're interviewing you. And culture and purpose kind of tie in together. So I always say, hey, if you're being interviewed by 5 or 6 different executives, ask each and every one of them, how would you describe the culture in your words at your organization? You may get 5 or 6 different answers, but hopefully there's consistency with the answers, right? We're collaborative, we're one team, we're this, we're that. And I think the same goes for what you just said. You can position it as, hey, since 2020, more and more companies are really prioritizing this idea of a purpose, a higher purpose. Just curious, within your organization, have those discussions happened? And if so, kind of what is that purpose in your own words? Because again, purpose is something that's kind of hard to just reel off, but someone could probably articulate it in their own words.
Yeah, and to Mark's point, and you say it eloquently, or just say, hey, what's your strategy on hybrid work? How comfortable are you being in the office or being at home? Like, you have to remember that person also is coming from a standpoint, and think about their job and maybe say, hey, so what tools do you feel like you're missing at your job? Or what tool, and we could go, or what tools do you feel like you have that you love working with? Like, there's a multitude of ways you can phrase the question. I say, though, I think, Mark, you give the same advice. Think about, though, the person you're talking to and what their job is, and maybe where they're doing their job. Like,
correct.
You got to remember, and to that point, what you said, the HR director is HR. They're 401k stuff. They're this stuff. Like, they're behind the scenes. They're not going to know how the team runs. It's on the side. But to Mark's great advice, at the end, you can start plugging away and getting a feel of truly what's going on, or maybe, what are they missing? What do they feel like they're missing out of their job? And that's okay too, I think. Jen, it's okay for them to give you an honest answer, to say, hey, you know what? We haven't done hybrid work most effectively, because hybrid work is expensive to deploy. We know endpoints are just very expensive to put video in your office, right? So, you got to kind of, maybe mull that over, or, discuss it with someone who's in the field. Get a mentor that can give you advice of truly what's it like to work at these companies with the tools that they're stating on the call.
The other thing that you're bringing up, which is fantastic, it all of a sudden shifts the interview into a conversation. So instead of being an interview where I feel like I'm in a 15-round boxing match, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, you just shifted it by simply saying, hey, I'm just curious, what's the, again, whether it's about culture, purpose, remote work, technology, now all of a sudden that you've engaged them, now we're all of a sudden in a conversation, and we may go off into this conversation. At the end of the interview, the interviewer is probably going to say something like, I really enjoyed the conversation with that candidate, as opposed to, we just had
right.
traditional interview.
Right. And that gives you, that now you become a better candidate, because now you know that a coworker inside that company can have an educated conversation and you could give insight. You're not saying, hey, I need to have this. You're like, hey,
Nope.
this is the tools I use, or I use this at Rutgers, and I'm sure Rutgers is very advanced on their technology. Right. Hey, this is how I like to work. I'm really effective when I have these tools. So I do, here at Cisco, I use a lot of platforms. We are platform centric. We love Microsoft. Obviously, we work with Cisco. We have all these amazing tools. It would be hard to pull me away from this. I have to say, it would be a bad day for me. If I couldn't work on a Mac and I couldn't use these tools, because to be honest, it's the way that I like to work. I'm an organized person. I need certain tools. I need shareable links all the time. When there's paper running around, I don't understand. I get confused by that. But Mark, give us insight. And we talked a little bit about that technology conversation. Yeah. And when we talk about technology, we can take it from devices or platforms. And I think people that are listening and you're going into the workforce, or employers, I think there's a difference. There's a big difference, actually. There's platforms to do your job effectively. There's forecasting if you're in sales. There's platforms for contacts. I mean, there's a multitude. So I think listening to this have to think about which and where the platforms lie and what categories they lie within, because you could probably have a whole day of conversation about good and bad platforms, right? But give us insight into what these Gen Z are coming into the workforce is asking for from, let's just talk of devices for a second.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, let me maybe start with just overarching first.
Yeah.
And, some of us may have heard this, but again, when I spoke to these recruiters and threw this out, you could see them like light bulbs going off, even though it's the kind of stuff I talk about all the time. First is just, and again, we hear this all the time, but Gen Z really is about working smarter, not harder. And technology plays a huge, huge role in that, right? I can say it again.
Can we coin that again? I think we need to coin that, what you just said.
Yes, work smarter, not harder. I can say, because I'm the Gen Xer here, in the 90s, hate to say that, early 2000s, it wasn't about smarter, not harder. It was about, I put in 15 hours today at the office. That's great, but what did you do, right? Did you get anything done? I showed up at 8, I left at 8 p.m., right? Great. But that doesn't show results per se. That just shows that you arrived early and you left late and you filled a space. So they're the completely opposite. They're about, how if we can work smarter? Maybe we don't have to be in the office 13 hours a day, but we can get the job done. And technology plays a huge, huge role in that, right? We know that. Tied into that is the idea that, again, Gen Z doesn't live to work like older generations. They work to live. Yes, they want to work, but they want to work so they can go out and experience life. They can go travel. They can do all these things, right? So it's not about, again, and I quit the figure myself, living to work was in essence what my generation did. We lived, right, every day to go to work. Technology plays a role in that again. So those are kind of two just overarching pillars. And the third one, which ties into both of those, Gen Z prioritizes their time. I know we all do, but it's all about how can I be more efficient in getting this done? Whatever this done is, a project on campus, the first assignment at the new job. How can we do this more efficiently, right? And so efficiency comes, and you know this much better than I, because I'm not the tech expert, but it does come down to platforms, apps, devices, systems, whatever you want to call it. And
usability, ease of use. I mean,
absolutely.
Right.
So what they'll do is, and I do call, by the way, I say this all the time, and I think this is my term. I didn't take this from the CMO of MTV, but I call the newest Gen Z employees, and even the interns, but the newest Gen Z employees, I call them, they're your ZEOs. And what I say is, open up the boardroom to the ZEOs. Do they have some tech solutions that could make this more efficient, more effective? Are there things they're using on campus today that maybe we're not using, but they're using them for the same reasons? They're collaborating, they're connecting, they're working, they're creating, they're finishing, in-depth research projects, whatever they might be. Maybe some of those things are applicable to our company, big or small. So I'm a big fan of the ZEOs.
It's funny. I've heard that before. A light bulb went off when you said it. I've heard that strategy. So I've heard companies and, C-level executives all around come up with a solution, and then they bring the Gen Zer in. And the whole project flips on its head, comes up with the whole new strategy, because that Gen Zer just gave you a whole different outlook of truly what the market is buying. And good, good or bad, you don't have to take the advice all the time. But giving that, I think that what you're saying is just giving a different perspective. Like they want different things out of outcomes that we're making decisions about. And so if the outcome and the result is not driven with purpose, or it's not driven with diversity, it doesn't have these other pieces, you're not going to attain that talent. And I think that's the difference. We don't want, I guess what you're saying is, people just don't want things because things are there. They want things because it has to have reason, and it has to be able to hold it or move it or do whatever they need to do with it.
Yeah, it's less on the employer side, but in 2018, Target was the first brand / company that I'm aware of, and I'm 99.9% sure I'm right, because I've
okay. Well, you're a marketing guru.
That launched a nationwide Gen Z incubator. So less about more of an employer and more about marketing to this consumer. But I still think I tell every employer, you could launch your own, call it incubator, call it think tank, call it council, call it whatever you want. But from an employer standpoint, why couldn't every recent graduate from this year, last year, whatever, be part of some sort of Gen Z in-house incubator, in-house think tank, where they can, again, collaborate, connect, bring to the C-suite and bring to others thoughts, solutions, ideas. These could be ideas around a new line of business, a new revenue stream, new technologies that aren't currently being used. And so I think that same idea of the Target incubator, which again was more about consumers and marketing to consumers, could be brought in-house to, again, inform all the things that you just talked about.
So Mark, it's interesting you brought that up. We do, and I talk about Cisco a lot. I obviously I work here, so I lean into it. But so we do an advanced leadership program, and the idea at the end of the program, and it takes a year, and obviously a lot of work goes into that program. But the end is to develop a new protocol or program or technology at Cisco, and then that idea goes up the chain. Actually, my team won. Thank you.
That's right.
But so what Mark is saying, like, these are great ideas to get thought leadership from a multitude of people. And to implement that, though, there's obviously a ton of strategies. One of the strategies that we do right here is that strategy. We have this advanced leadership program. If you want to be involved, you can. And then you learn about other team members. But at the end of that program, it takes a year, you develop that new protocol. So you get insight from all these different individuals that you never would have met. I would have never met my team if I wasn't working with them. And it's interesting. It's funny, I would have never brought that up, though, on an interview. Like, thinking back, I would have never been like, well, if I have a good idea, how does that even make its way through this corporation? Like, I wouldn't even think to bring that question up. And it's funny that you talk about it, because it's probably such an important key. How do I get my voice heard? How is my voice, right? Like, how do I get a seat at the table a little bit, right? And
So to your point, wouldn't it be great? And again, we know companies are all, 50, 60, 70,000 employees down to 100 employees, but wouldn't it be great if a company I was interviewing with, I found out, we actually have this, whatever you want to call it, young employee, Gen Z employee, incubator, think tank, something where, and it's not just lip service, but we actually are empowering you to come to the C-suite, to senior management, senior leaders, with ideas that can help us, work smarter, more efficient, be more effective, all those things.
Right. I mean, I would be blown away if someone brought that up, if an employer brought that up to me, and I mean, imagine this is just, I would be beyond impressed. Hey, you have a voice here, because I feel like a lot when they interview, it's all about the company and it's not about you. And I think it's got to be a 50-50 match. And, by them saying, hey, no, if you come on, we do all these great things for you. It's funny, thinking back, I don't think employers do enough to put their name out there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Probably,
and it's one of, I guess, the pillars that I didn't necessarily cover at the beginning, but one thing that's really important to Gen Z, and I love that you brought that 50-50 up, is I do want to work for somewhere where they actually have a vested interest in me as an individual, me and my career, helping me evolve through my career, giving me opportunities, whether those are ability to go to, I don't know, conferences, courses, learning this, that, the other. But I want to have that. And so that's, as you know, that's within a culture. You either have that or you don't have that as part of, let's help everybody, grow, evolve. And I think you either have that or you don't, meaning from a corporate standpoint, it's either in place or it's not in place. I think you can put it in place. probably takes a lot to.
You're right. You could put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, and I'm thinking back, I wonder where that drives from. Is it that the CEO saying that has to be a pillar, because it's probably hard to show a true ROI on all that investment, right? But at the end of the day, you're trying to retain talent and attract talent, which is a huge investment.
And that's your point, and that's a metric, right? We can go from year to year to year, and we can look at, are we retaining more talent or less talent? We can easily do that, right? I mean, just a round number. If we have 100 employees and we've lost 20, well, geez, we've lost 20% of our workforce. But hey, look, we didn't put this program in place, and this year we only lost 5. I think to your point, it's at the C-suite, but it could be, there's so many more now people with titles like Chief People Officer, Chief Talent Officer, and then more so since 2020. We're seeing more Chief Diversity Officers, Chief Inclusive Officers. So I think there's some combination of that,
coming out
maybe
now,
sharing it as a mission as part of the company.
And I guess we could take this back for a second, because if you, as a Gen Z, are looking to on LinkedIn, you can look at those titles. Like, you could easily find whether the company is investing in that line or not. So maybe you can start kind of building your own story. And if it's there, then those are great conversation topics. And, understanding what the title means and does then opens the door up, more and more, for attraction, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's part of that research. And funny, so this is how like right now we're in, the fall of 22. So the next graduating class in May 23, this is the time when I again, on the side, I do this. I just say, here's what I'd be doing right now. I'd be doing all my research now. What are those 15 or 20 companies you've researched that you say, I want to work there, as opposed to just waiting for job postings randomly? And part of that research, I say, is, have they been identified as a great place to work, a great company to work? And if so, there's reasons for that. What are those reasons? Things like we're talking about here. But all that kind of contributes to, all of a sudden, wow, well, this company is actually number 1 on my list, because based on the research I did, it really looks like they care about their employees. It really looks like they're innovative when it comes to technology and what they're providing, employees and things like that. So combination of all those factors.
Yeah, you're right. And there are a lot of platforms out there like Glassdoor, and there's other platforms that could give you that insight. I don't know how much they're going into the purpose and the diversity inclusion. So I
agree.
I don't want to talk out of turn too much.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think to your point, you there's ways to conduct that research and learn.
Definitely.
Or as you said, if they've hired a chief diversity officer since 2020, which again, many companies have, well, I'm sure that person has conducted podcast interviews, YouTube interviews. So even just listening to them and their mission at this company will give you some insights that, to your point, you're not going to find on probably a Glassdoor or somewhere else.
No, it's great insight. I think you and I can talk about, entries into companies and exits and what we look for and the hows and the whys all day.
Yes.
I think we all need to take time and have these, mental health days. I think it's so important. And it's funny. I don't ask enough questions sometimes, I don't think. And this interview really gets me thinking about the other side of it, right?
Absolutely.
What other advice do you want to give to our Gen Z listeners, or even companies hiring Gen Zs? We covered a lot, but we have a few more.
The one area, and I know we touched on the tech, but I think, and again, I'm not a tech guru, you're the tech guru, but Gen Z is looking for companies that are on the front line of the latest technology, adopting it, testing it, learning it, trying it out. So I think that's really important, because again, coming back to this generation that learned to swipe before they could wipe, a lot of these Gen Zers have launched companies on their phone. They've launched 501c3s while they're in college. They've launched, initiatives, campaigns. Well, they're looking for companies to even take that to the next level. And so whether in the interview process or not, or once they're there, if they get there like, boy, these guys are old school when it comes to technology. They're using, they're not even, they're just not up to date. I could be getting this work done more efficiently, more effectively if they had this, that, the other thing. That is a big turn off. So again, they are tech savvy. They are, digital focused. So that is one of those, again, I keep going back to kind of these 5 or 6 pillars. It's an important one. It's a really important one. And it's probably even more important, in the interview process, hopefully the candidates bringing it up. But once they're on the job that first day, soon they're going to realize, oh boy, these guys are really tech advanced, or they're still back in 2005.
Right. It's funny you bring that up. I come from a collaboration background. That was how I got into the tech field. And I talk about it a lot because I love collaboration and tools and functionality and communication. I think a lot of companies invest in, which is fair, infrastructure, where the infrastructure needs to run all the applications, and they're not really looking at then how do your employees as well communicate, especially now we're going to hybrid. And why do we need the best in class? Because it has best in class functionality behind it. Like, I think that companies really need to sometimes take a better look of, hey, let's buy this. Okay, then what does it look like from a user interface perspective? Yeah. What does that give us, and what is that doing or not doing? I wonder how many surveys are truly out there asking employees what platforms do they need, or what platforms are we missing, or what would they like to see?
Yeah, I think you've hit a great one there on two parts. One, current employee force, simple survey conducted internally, just a technology-based one. So this survey has nothing to do with, diversity, inclusion, culture, any of those things. This is just a technology-based, and interesting to see what comes back, maybe even suggestions. And as we kind of talked earlier, boy, what if we could go out and do that with some current university students, the next generation of our employees? What's on the cutting edge, or what are they using? What are they comfortable with? Because that would be interesting too, to kind of get a sense just nationwide, here's the things we're using to conduct campaigns on campus, to conduct research projects, to collaborate, to connect, because there's probably some insights there and some things that maybe some companies aren't even aware of that are being currently used by Gen Z.
Oh, 1,000%. And what's up and coming, right? So I think it's not even so much from a device standpoint. What platforms are you using? Like, obviously we know the big ones, but there's little ones solving very big problems that we're not aware of. And someone made a solution for something. There's a million companies out there that have solutions and figured it out. So, hey, why not do a test? Hey, we're going to run a proof of concept on this platform. It wouldn't hurt. So I think we need to do more uncovering of that. I truly do.
I agree. I'll give you an example. Again, this is a marketing example, not an employer example. But I would say since April of this year, maybe March, but this, I'll call it a social media platform, Be Real, has really gained a lot of traction with Gen Zers. To the point now where, just last week, Chipotle announced they're launching their first campaign on Be Real. So, a typical Gen Xer wouldn't even know what Be Real is. But if you're mining for that and asking about that and questioning, and the same as applies to, again, platforms and technology and all those kinds of things, you're going to uncover things like that are kind of in the early stages and not a year or two or 3 or 4 or 5 years later. So, I mean, that's more of an example from a social media perspective, but it's really, that platform. Yeah, that platform's been around for less than 2 years. But what happened was earlier this year in March and April, they mobilized university ambassadors across the country, and all of a sudden it started gaining a lot of traction in April, May, June, July, August of this year. And now brands are recognizing, here's a platform we should probably test and learn and see how it could work from, a marketing standpoint.
Right. And maybe that platform went all in on marketing, where these other platforms are just too clunky and they're not getting the job done. Like, every platform is built with a purpose. Right. And that if you could figure out what makes it great, or what, and I teach this to my intern, look at the notifications and where the platform releases are going, and what does it tell you that they've released? Because they're all trying to do the same thing. Like, I say it a lot. You have to read, like, hey, we pushed out a new software update. Well, what did that software update? What does it do to help you in your business? That's some of the best advice I've given, right? Because they're trying to gain more market share by adding in functionality, and we forget that platform has done these things. So to that point, you never know how a platform is built and why. Yeah. Once you start playing with it, to anyone, I think you could figure it out, but you got to stay on top of it. And actually, I had a C-level executive say, can you give me a newsletter of all the updates that, like, Cisco is doing and Microsoft is doing? Like, I'm lost in it. Like, they, and it's hard to stay up to date. You got to remember, these companies have a multitude of platforms, and a person has a multitude of platforms. But if it's a platform that you use regularly or someone's using regularly, I would say like read the notifications, read what they've released and why, because you could probably get some good information about it. Mark,
As
we have a few minutes left.
as opposed to, which is the normal, is people just getting annoyed that it's an update. By the way, I've got to wait 5 minutes to update the platform.
Right. And I think that's, I guess maybe because I'm in technology, I'm so focused on it. And it's like, if I don't do my software updates, I do them right away, or I'm forced to a little bit, but but to that point, it also gets you reading and thinking that, hey, well, what did they just push out and why? Or why was the platform built? To what you were saying before about this new, social media platform. Maybe they built it for marketing. Maybe they built it easier with marketing as the forefront and social media as the back end. So, there's a multitude of different ways. I think what we talk about a lot is everybody has different go-to-markets. Like, how do they want to show up? Where do they want to invest? What do they want to do? And I think it's your job as a consumer, whether you're trying to attract talent, gain talent, is to promote those things, is to talk about them, because they are important. And if you're not putting it out there, no one really knows.
Agreed.
Yeah. Anything else about the Gen Zers using technology?
I would just say, Fast Company reported this recently, and I'm sure other outlets too, but by 2030, which is only 7+ years away, Gen Z will comprise at least 30% of the workforce, at least. Maybe 33%, maybe 34%, whatever. 1 in every 3 employees at a company is going to be a Gen Zer in just 7 years. So I think, again, employers, big and small, they're coming each and every year by the thousands. So again, I think the idea is, instead of putting the hand up and saying, well, these are young folks, and what do they know? Instead, embrace, invite, connect, collaborate. You might uncover some incredible insights that, again, go back to, I know I've said it too many times, make work more efficient, more effective, those kinds of things. So I think it's just important to realize that they're not going to be slowing down. There's more and more Gen Zs joining your company, this company, that company, each and every year.
Mark, I think that was perfectly said. I don't think you could have given better insight to the fact that there's purpose, diversity. They're going to ask questions, and they're requiring technology. So, however you want to implement that, who's ever listening, from a CEO level or just a corporation, or, down to attracting talent, I think you have to think and put your hat on and have that, the eyes in the back of your head on the side, because they're coming. So
absolutely.
Well said. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. I think we gave great insight. I think, maybe you'll play the podcast at your during class, or we'll join over video and say hello. But thank you so much for being on the show and spending your morning with me. I think you gave insight also when you first got on the show. You said that you read the news and you look at publications in the morning. I do the same. I think I get some newsletters. That's where I get my, my truth serum, or what I think is important to put out there, and what I, think is interesting to talk about at some of my business meetings. I do the same. I think that's also, just shows, instead of looking at social media in the morning, change that game, right? Look at publications that are giving you education and talking about different insights and what's going on in the world. So
absolutely.
I love that little tidbit when you got on. So again, Mark, thank you for being on the show. Any last words?
No, Danielle, this was great discussion. Again, I'm not the tech expert, but I love how
you don't need to be.
I love how, though, we really did make a connection between Gen Z, tech, and of course other areas as it relates to what they're looking for in future employers.
Yeah, definitely. A lot to think about. So, hats off to the people in those positions. Again, this is Danielle with the Motivity Podcast, and we are just simplifying the tech chat. And thank you, Mark, for being on the show.